Samuel Thornton stood at the weathered gate of his farm, watching the approaching dust cloud with a heaviness in his heart. The doctor's wagon. It was finally happening. He gripped the worn wood of the fence post, feeling the splinters dig into his calloused palm. Behind him lay 20 acres of land that had been in his family for 3 generations. Land he was about to sign away. The wheat fields swayed in the afternoon breeze, golden and ready for harvest. A harvest he wouldn't be there to see. But none of that mattered now. Not when Emma's ragged coughing echoed from the small farmhouse behind him. Not when his 80-year-old daughter's life hung by a thread. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Your comment helps our community grow stronger. Thanks, and let's get back to the story. The wagon drew closer, and Samuel could make out the figure of Dr. James Harrington, sitting tall and straight-backed. His stomach churned with a bitter mix of emotions. This was the same man who had failed to save Sarah, his beloved wife, when she'd given birth to Emma. The same man who now held the power to save their daughter from the same mysterious illness that had taken her mother. And the same man who would soon own everything Samuel had worked for. Dr. Harrington pulled the horses to a stop, the animals snorting and pawing at the dirt. For a moment, the two men simply stared at each other, years of unspoken history hanging between them like the dust in the air. Samuel broke the silence first. "Doctor." He managed a curt nod. Dr. Harrington climbed down from the wagon, his movements deliberate and careful. "Mr. Thornton." He held a leather satchel in one hand and removed his hat with the other, revealing graying hair at his temples that hadn't been there 8 years ago. "I've brought the papers." Samuel nodded again, unable to trust his voice. He pushed open the gate, the familiar creak now a painful reminder of all he was about to lose. "I'd like to see Emma first, if I may," the doctor said, his voice softer than Samuel remembered. "She's having a bad day," Samuel replied, leading the way toward the modest farmhouse. The words felt inadequate to describe the terror of watching his daughter struggle for each breath, her small body burning with fever. Inside, the house was cool and dim. Samuel had drawn the curtains to keep out the harsh summer sun. The familiar scent of pine soap and dried herbs hung in the air, a final vestige of Sarah's presence that Samuel had stubbornly maintained all these years. Emma's room was at the back of the house, where the morning sun wouldn't disturb her fitful sleep. Samuel paused at the doorway, watching as Dr. Harrington approached the small bed where his daughter lay. Emma's face was flushed with fever, her blonde hair, so like her mother's, dark with sweat against her pillow. Her breath came in short, labored gasps, her thin chest rising and falling too rapidly. The doctor set his bag down and placed a gentle hand on Emma's forehead. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing the same deep blue that had once looked up at Samuel from Sarah's face. "Hello, Miss Emma," the doctor said, his professional demeanor softening. "Remember me? I'm Dr. Harrington." Emma nodded weakly. "You gave me peppermint candy," she whispered. Samuel was surprised. He hadn't known the doctor had visited while he was working the fields. "That's right," the doctor smiled, taking out his stethoscope. "And I happen to have brought some more today. But first, let me have a listen to that chest of yours." Samuel watched from the doorway as Dr. Harrington examined his daughter with careful, practiced movements. There was something in the doctor's face, something beyond professional concern, that Samuel couldn't quite place. When the examination was finished, Dr. Harrington stepped out into the narrow hallway, gesturing for Samuel to follow him to the kitchen. "It's progressed, Mr. Thornton, exactly as I feared," the doctor said once they were out of Emma's earshot. "The same constellation of symptoms her mother displayed. The specialist in Chicago is our best hope now. I've already sent a telegram. He's expecting us by the end of the week." Samuel leaned against the kitchen table, the same table where he'd sat with Sarah planning their future, the same table where he'd held Emma as a newborn while his wife's body was being prepared for burial in the next room. "And the farm?" Samuel asked, the words like ash in his mouth. Dr. Harrington opened his satchel and pulled out several documents. "My offer stands. The full amount, as discussed. More than fair market value." Samuel wanted to laugh. Fair. There was nothing fair about any of this. Nothing fair about losing Sarah. Nothing fair about Emma inheriting the same mysterious illness. Nothing fair about having to sell his birthright to the very man who had failed his family before. "And you're certain this specialist can help her?" Samuel asked, though he knew he had no choice either way. Dr. Harrington met his gaze steadily. "Dr. Whitaker is the foremost authority on rare respiratory conditions. If anyone can help Emma, it's him. But we need to leave tomorrow." Time is not our ally, Mr. Thornton. Samuel nodded and picked up the pen the doctor offered. The ink was black and final as he signed his name once, twice, 3 times. With each signature, generations of Thornton history slipped through his fingers. The transaction complete, Dr. Harrington handed over an envelope thick with cash. It was more money than Samuel had ever seen, yet it felt worthless compared to what he'd just surrendered. I'll return at dawn with the wagon prepared for travel, the doctor said, gathering the signed documents. Pack lightly, but bring whatever comforts Emma might need for the journey. After the doctor left, Samuel sat alone at the kitchen table, the envelope untouched before him. Through the window, he could see the fields his grandfather had cleared by hand, the barn his father had rebuilt after a fire, the apple orchard he himself had planted when Emma was born. All of it now belonging to James Harrington. He pushed back from the table and returned to Emma's room. She was sleeping again, her breathing slightly less labored after whatever medicine the doctor had given her. Samuel sat gently on the edge of her bed, careful not to disturb her. He brushed a damp strand of hair from her forehead. We're going on a journey tomorrow, little one, he whispered, to see a special doctor in the big city. He held her small hand in his. And everything's going to be all right. As the sun set on what would be their last night in the Thornton family home, Samuel began packing their meager belongings. He chose only what they would need. Some clothes, Emma's favorite quilt, the locket containing a lock of Sarah's hair. The rest would stay with the house, with the land, with the past. Dawn broke clear and crisp the next morning. Emma was too weak to walk, so Samuel carried her to the porch and sat with her bundled in blankets as they waited for the doctor's wagon. She leaned against his chest, her eyes taking in the farm that had been her only home. Will we come back, Papa? She asked, her voice thin but steady. Samuel hesitated. I don't know, sweetheart, but we'll be together, and that's what matters. Dr. Harrington arrived precisely as promised, the back of his wagon now fitted with a mattress and pillows to make Emma comfortable for the journey. Samuel was surprised by the thoughtfulness of the arrangement. The doctor jumped down from the driver's seat. Good morning. I trust you're both ready? Samuel nodded, lifting Emma in his arms. As ready as we'll ever be. With careful movements, they settled Emma in the back of the wagon. Samuel climbed up beside her, unwilling to leave her side even for a moment. Dr. Harrington handed up a small paper bag to Emma. Peppermint candy, as promised, he said with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Emma's face brightened slightly as she took the bag. Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Harrington returned to the driver's seat and took up the reins. Without being asked, he paused, allowing Samuel a moment to look back at the farm, to say his silent goodbyes to the only life he'd ever known. Then, with a gentle flick of the reins, they were moving, rolling away from the past and toward an uncertain future. The journey to Chicago would take 3 days if the weather held. They followed dusty roads that connected small frontier towns, each one slightly larger than the last as they moved eastward. The rhythmic sway of the wagon and the steady clop of the horses' hooves created a hypnotic backdrop to their travels. To Samuel's surprise, Dr. Harrington proved to be an attentive traveling companion. He stopped frequently to check on Emma, offering her water and small sips of a medicine that seemed to ease her breathing. During these breaks, Samuel would stretch his legs and watch as the doctor spoke softly to his daughter, showing none of the clinical detachment Samuel had expected. At midday on their first day of travel, they stopped in the shade of a large elm tree. Dr. Harrington prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and apples while Samuel helped Emma sit up against a pile of blankets. She's doing well, the doctor observed, handing Samuel a tin cup of water. Better than I expected, given her condition. She's strong, Samuel replied. Like her mother. At the mention of Sarah, a shadow passed over the doctor's face. Yes, he said quietly, she is. That night, they made camp by a small creek. After settling Emma in the wagon with extra blankets against the evening chill, Samuel found himself sitting across a small fire from Dr. Harrington. The crackling flames cast moving shadows across the doctor's face, making him look older, wearier. I never apologized properly, the doctor said suddenly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. For Sarah. Samuel stiffened. There had been a time when he'd blamed the doctor entirely for Sarah's death, when his grief had needed somewhere to land. But the years had tempered his anger, replaced it with a dull ache of acceptance. You did what you could, Samuel said, surprising himself with the words. Dr. Harrington shook his head. I should have recognized the symptoms earlier, should have tried different treatments. After she, After we lost her, I spent years researching similar cases. That's how I learned of Dr. Whitaker's work. Samuel looked up sharply. That's why you know so much about Emma's condition. The doctor nodded, his eyes reflecting the firelight. I followed his research closely. When I heard through Mrs. Palmer at the general store that Emma was showing the same symptoms as Sarah, I knew he was her best chance. A new understanding dawned on Samuel. So buying my farm was the fastest way to ensure Emma gets the treatment she needs. Dr. Harrington finished. Time is critical with this condition, Mr. Thornton. Samuel stared into the fire, processing this revelation. All this time, he'd assumed the doctor was taking advantage of his desperate situation, perhaps even seeking to ease his own guilt. The truth was both simpler and more complex. Call me Samuel, he said finally. If we're to be traveling companions, Mr. Thornton seems overly formal. A faint smile crossed the doctor's face. James, then, he offered in return. The next 2 days followed a similar pattern. As they traveled, Emma's condition fluctuated. Some hours she seemed stronger, sitting up to watch the changing landscape with interest. Other times, her fever would spike, and she would slip into a restless sleep, her breathing becoming more labored. During one particularly bad spell, Samuel felt panic rising in his chest as Emma struggled to draw breath. James quickly pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed into the back, his movements swift and sure. He mixed a special powder into water and helped Emma drink it, then positioned her upright against his chest, instructing Samuel to rub her back in gentle circles. Talk to her, James directed. Keep her calm and focused on your voice. Samuel began to speak, telling Emma stories of when she was a baby, of the farm in springtime, of her mother's favorite flowers. Gradually, her breathing eased, and the blue tinge around her lips receded. That night, after Emma had fallen into a more peaceful sleep, Samuel found himself asking the question that had been on his mind since they'd left the farm. What will you do with it? The farm? James looked up from the medical journal he'd been reading by lantern light. I thought you might want to know that, he said. I plan to keep the fields in production, of course. The region needs the grain. But I'm also considering converting part of the property into a small clinic. Samuel raised his eyebrows in surprise. A clinic? Out there? James nodded. The nearest doctor is in Riversbend, nearly a day's ride from most folks in your area. A local clinic could serve the community, provide basic care and emergency services. It was a good idea, Samuel had to admit. The kind of thing that might have saved Sarah had such a facility existed 8 years ago. And what of us? If when Emma recovers? Samuel asked, forcing himself to believe in the possibility of his daughter's recovery. James set his journal aside. The property is yours to work for as long as you wish, Samuel. I'll need someone who knows the land, and Emma will need a stable home during her recovery. The offer caught Samuel off guard. He had assumed they would need to start over somewhere new, perhaps in one of the growing towns they'd passed through. The thought of returning to the farm, even under these changed circumstances, stirred complicated feelings. I'll consider it, was all he could say. As they approached Chicago on the afternoon of the third day, Samuel's anxiety grew. The city rose before them, a sprawling maze of buildings taller than any he'd ever seen. The noise and bustle were overwhelming after the quiet of farm life and the open road. Emma, however, looked out at the city with wide-eyed wonder. It's like in my storybook, Papa, she whispered. James navigated the wagon through crowded streets with practiced ease, eventually pulling up before a stately brick building with a sign identifying it as Lakeside Hospital. An attendant came out immediately, having been alerted to their arrival. Within moments, Emma was being gently transferred to a wheelchair. Samuel stayed close, his hand on her shoulder as they were led through the hospital's hushed corridors. Dr. Whitaker was waiting for them in a private room. He was older than Samuel had expected, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. James and Dr. Whitaker greeted each other warmly, suggesting a relationship beyond mere professional correspondence. So this is our young patient, Dr. Whitaker said, kneeling to Emma's eye level. What a brave girl you must be, traveling all this way. Emma smiled shyly. I saw a real city, she told him, and Dr. Harrington gave me peppermint candy. Did he now? Dr. Whitaker glanced up at James with an amused expression. Then he's clearly a very wise doctor indeed. The examination that followed was thorough but gentle. Dr. Whitaker spoke directly to Emma throughout, explaining what he was doing in simple terms that didn't frighten her. Samuel watched, impressed by the doctor's manner and the advanced equipment in the room, things he'd never seen in the small frontier clinic where Sarah had died. When the examination was complete, Dr. Whitaker asked to speak with Samuel and James privately. A nurse stayed with Emma, showing her a picture book about animals. In the hallway, Dr. Whitaker's expression grew serious. It's the familial respiratory syndrome we've discussed, James. Just as you suspected. His gaze shifted to Samuel. Your wife had the same condition? Samuel nodded, a lump forming in his throat. Yes. Took her quickly after Emma was born. Dr. Whitaker nodded thoughtfully. The childbirth likely accelerated the progression. In children, we typically see a slower development of symptoms, which gives us more time to intervene. And can you help her? Samuel asked, the question that had driven him to sell his farm, to trust the man who couldn't save his wife, to journey to this overwhelming city. I believe so, Mr. Thornton, Dr. Whitaker said. We've developed a new treatment protocol that has shown promising results in similar cases. It involves a specialized breathing regimen, a carefully calibrated medication schedule, and in Emma's case, a minor procedure to clear the affected airways. The relief that washed over Samuel was so powerful he had to lean against the wall for support. James placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. When can you begin? James asked. Immediately, Dr. Whitaker replied. I've already had the room prepared. With your permission, Mr. Thornton, I'd like to start Emma on the medications tonight and schedule the procedure for tomorrow morning. Samuel straightened, finding his voice. Yes, whatever she needs. The next days passed in a blur of hospital routines. Emma's procedure went well, though Samuel aged years in the hours he spent in the waiting room with James. The doctor stayed with him the entire time, sometimes silent, sometimes sharing stories of other patients who had recovered from seemingly hopeless conditions. Emma's recovery began slowly. There were difficult days when Samuel wondered if they had made the right decision, if the journey and treatment were too much for her small body to bear. But gradually, undeniably, she began to improve. Her breathing eased, her fever subsided, and color returned to her cheeks. 2 weeks after their arrival in Chicago, Emma sat up in bed and asked for a second helping at breakfast. That's the first time she's had a proper appetite in months, Samuel told James when the doctor visited that afternoon. James smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. Dr. Whitaker says it's an excellent sign. In fact, he believes Emma may be ready to travel home within the week, provided we continue her treatments. Home. The word hung in the air between them. Samuel hadn't decided yet whether he would accept James's offer to return to the farm. Part of him wanted to make a completely fresh start, away from the memories of Sarah and his loss. But watching Emma grow stronger, he realized that perhaps those memories weren't only painful. Perhaps there was comfort in them too. I've been thinking about your offer, Samuel said slowly, to work the farm. James nodded, waiting for him to continue. I'd like to accept, but with one condition, Samuel said. I want to help with the clinic. I'm no doctor, but I can build. I can learn to assist. Surprise flickered across James's face, followed by something that looked like respect. It would be valuable to have someone local involved, he said. Someone the community already trusts. It was settled. In 6 days' time, they would begin the journey back to what Samuel was learning to think of as their new home, rather than his former one. The return journey was markedly different from their desperate trip to Chicago. Emma, though still weak, sat up for hours watching the passing scenery. She asked endless questions about the plants and animals they saw, her curiosity a sure sign of her returning health. James answered her questions with patience, sharing his knowledge of natural history. Samuel watched their interactions with a growing sense of wonder. The doctor he had once resented was becoming someone else in his eyes. A friend, perhaps, or at least no longer an adversary. They arrived back at the farm on a perfect autumn day. The fields were golden, ready for harvest, just as they had been when they left. But Samuel saw the place with new eyes now. Not just as his lost inheritance, but as the foundation for something new. Emma insisted on walking from the wagon to the house, though Samuel stayed close, ready to carry her if she tired. She paused at the front porch, looking up at the familiar weathered boards and windows. It looked smaller, she observed with the honesty of childhood. Samuel laughed. That's because you've seen big city buildings now. James followed with their bags, hanging back slightly as if uncertain of his place in this homecoming. Emma turned to him. Will you stay for supper, Dr. Harrington? Papa makes good biscuits. James looked to Samuel, a question in his eyes. Stay, Samuel said, finding he meant it. We should discuss plans for the harvest. And the clinic. That evening, as Emma slept peacefully in her room, her breathing clear and even for the first time in months, Samuel and James sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I've been meaning to ask," Samuel said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Why did you really buy this farm?" James was quiet for a long moment. "After Sarah died, I couldn't forgive myself," he finally said. "I left Riverspend, studied with specialists in the East, determined to never lose another patient the same way. When I returned and heard about Emma, I knew I had to help." He paused. "But I also knew you wouldn't accept charity from me. So you offered a business transaction instead," Samuel finished. James nodded. "The farm is a good investment. The clinic will serve a real need. But yes, it was about Emma, about making amends." He looked out across the darkened fields, about creating something good from tragedy. Samuel considered this. The farm had been his family's legacy, but perhaps its new purpose, continuing to feed the community while also offering healing, was a fitting evolution of that legacy. "Sarah would have approved," he said quietly. James glanced at him, surprise evident in his expression. "Of the clinic," Samuel clarified. "She always said this land had a way of providing exactly what people needed." The two men sat in silence after that, each with their own thoughts, as the first cool breeze of fall rustled through the wheat fields. From inside the house came the sound of Emma's soft, untroubled breathing, the most beautiful sound Samuel had ever heard. Before their arrival, James had arranged for the wheat to be harvested by workers from town. In the days that followed, Samuel joined them in the fields, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of the work. Emma grew stronger each day, sitting on the porch to watch the activity, sometimes helped by Mrs. Palmer from the general store, who came by with baked goods and motherly attention. James divided his time between his duties in Riverspend and planning for the new clinic. He brought architects' drawings and lists of equipment, seeking Samuel's input on how to convert the old storage barn into a functional medical facility. As autumn deepened into winter, the transformation began. The barn was reinforced, partitioned, outfitted with large windows to admit natural light. Samuel worked alongside the builders, his hands remembering skills from years of maintaining the farm. By the first snowfall, the basic structure was complete. Emma thrived in the cold, clear air. Dr. Whitaker's treatments continued to work, and the girl who had once been too weak to leave her bed was now building snowmen in the yard and helping Samuel feed the horses. One evening, as Christmas approached, Samuel found Emma sitting on her mother's old rocking chair, looking thoughtfully at the completed clinic building. "What are you thinking about, little one?" he asked, sitting beside her. Emma was quiet for a moment. "Do you think Mama can see the clinic from heaven?" Samuel's heart tightened. "I believe she can." Emma nodded, satisfied. "Then she can see that Dr. Harrington is our friend now." She smiled. "And that we're happy again." Out of the mouths of children, Samuel thought, marveling at his daughter's simple wisdom. Yes, despite everything, or perhaps because of it, they were finding happiness again. The clinic opened officially in the spring. People came from miles around, curious about the new facility and the doctor who had established it. James had arranged for a young assistant doctor to help staff it, ensuring care would be available even when he was in Riverspend. On opening day, Samuel watched as James showed visitors around the clinic, explaining the equipment and services with obvious pride. Emma followed at his heels, appointed herself as a second tour guide, charming everyone she met. Later, when the visitors had gone, the three of them walked to the small family cemetery on the hill behind the house. Emma placed wildflowers on her mother's grave while Samuel and James stood in respectful silence. "I think she would be pleased," Samuel said quietly. "With all of this, the clinic, Emma's recovery." He hesitated, then added, "with how things turned out between us." James nodded, his expression solemn but peaceful. "I hope so." Emma rejoined them, slipping her small hand into Samuel's. "Can we have pie now?" she asked, practical as always. James laughed, the sound carrying across the fields where new spring wheat was already pushing up through the soil. Emma's appetite had become something of a running joke between them, a joyful reminder of her return to health. As they walked back toward the house, Samuel looked out over the land that had been his burden and his birthright. The fields his grandfather had cleared, the barn his father had built, now transformed into a place of healing. The home where his daughter would grow up healthy and strong. Some legacies, he realized, were meant to change, to become something new without losing what made them precious. And sometimes the greatest acts of love came disguised as business transactions, as medical procedures, as second chances neither man had expected to find. If you enjoyed the story of redemption and second chances, please hit that like button and share with a friend. Remember, every comment helps more people discover our frontier tales. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you in the next video.